Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Reinsurance Podcast. I'm your co-host, Jared Lee.
And I'm your other co-host, Ben Rose.
Oh, I got through that intro. I don't usually have to double take intros, but I was fumbling all over that.
Well, you remembered your name.
Success.
That's always good.
Tick number one.
Remember
Always
the name
important.
of the podcast.
Yeah. Remembered your name.
Yeah.
You always do that part for me, which is helpful. But today, we're obviously talking about something near and dear to both of our hearts, the London market.
Yes. So either you're familiar with the London market, and in which case this will be a very nostalgic, forward-looking, exciting kind of episode, or you're not, or you're only partially engaged with the London market. Perhaps you travel there on business. Perhaps you hope one day to work there.
Yeah.
In which case, we're going to supplement your current imagination. I was going to say imaginary imagination, but must be a better
It's
term.
like the Inception version. It's levels of imagination.
Exactly.
Down.
Or your meta imagination.
Yeah.
Your
So for those younger people to the industry in the U.S. who have yet to experience the London market, we're going to dive into that. We'll talk about things like kind of how it got started, why it's unique, and then obviously all the things that make us love it so much.
Indeed.
Like drinking at lunchtime.
Just drop that in the subtitles. For censorship reasons, during the most of this podcast, we won't say anything about drinking, but we'll come up with some other term or a gentle nod for those of you watching the video.
Yeah.
Or a little hand signal to show why the London market is such fun.
No. But I guess we should start with like why London has its sort of place in reinsurance, especially as something that's unique. Obviously, it's one of the epicenters of insurance and reinsurance more globally. I think there's a little bit of challenge as to where insurance would have originally begun, right? You could say Babylon or something if you wanted. But sort of the earliest sort of remnant of what we experience today probably existed sort of London, what, a couple 300 years ago or so?
Yeah, I think probably what's very distinctive about the London market's history is actually the continuity as well as anything else. So the fact that it started at arguably, I mean, in its current form, what we know as Lloyd's, started as a coffee shop, founded by somebody called Edward Lloyd. And largely the same principles that govern it today were evolved from the earliest setting of that coffee shop and have gradually been added to throughout its history. So very unique and very distinctive because of its history, and for the same reasons very difficult to replicate for other regional centers of insurance and reinsurance trade that haven't had the same amount of time, I guess, to develop, or the same need when London has been such a global center. Yeah.
Well, we've always talked about the number of times we look at sort of the natural evolution of our industry and products and everything else. I think the London market and what makes it special today is still no different. You have it where that original version is that coffee shop, and the ship owners would go there. They'd be discussing the ships of the day, what the cargo was, where they were going, and they began to emerge this need to protect that cargo if the ship were to sink, which was common back in the day. And they would talk about the ships that were about to embark, and they would then put a piece of paper up that would say, here's the ship and its cargo and its value and what we might cost or charge to insure it. And the term underwriter emerges from that, where people would start writing their names underneath the risk itself, and you began to be an underwriter by being someone whose name was written on those documents. But that sort of collegiate nature, sort of began to be the natural evolution of the specialty expertise that this industry has, as that began to sort of grow in its popularity and uptake. More people began to emerge to join that conversation, as well as the types of risks sort of began to move away from just the marine risks, but this recognition that there's lots of risks that current society faces and businesses face and everything else. And here's this growing group of people who are just very good at building a way to price and understand that risk. And that sort of core, both its collegial nature where they're all sort of pooling together and sharing their insights, that openness in many ways of understanding that we're all on this risk together, even in many ways the transparency of going, oh, I saw Ben was on this risk, I will join this risk too, is still common in Lloyd's specifically because they will walk around with the slip and they'll go around to the different syndicates and they will all add themselves to that page. So all these sort of traits that made it special when it emerged, a lot of them, as you say, that continuity continue through till today.
Absolutely. So I think maybe other people who are listening to this have done this as well, but you echoed for me some of the things that I featured on the Chartered Insurance Institute's Lloyd's and London Market Introductory Test, or the LLMIT.
Yeah,
You do that one as well?
I did. It's changed now, right?
Probably. Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Oh, they were dating ourselves badly.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
So who knows if it still exists? But on that paper, they'd be like, oh, why is London a hub for insurance and reinsurance? What makes it special? And it's exactly as you said, this concentration and reputation of and for expertise, having all of these great underwriters in one place. It's the footfall that's generated, but also some other things like the stability of the frameworks and the legislation, well regarded for having consistently applied and well precedented laws applying to the application of insurance and reinsurance contracts. Time zone is listed on there as well. The fact that it's nestled conveniently between the US and North America, South America, and the rest of the world the other way. All of these things, I think, were found to be reasons why the London market potentially could excel beyond any other for so many periods of history. Yeah. And also probably being sat at the heart of what was the British Empire made a bit of a difference at some key.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well. Also in some negative ways, as obviously the history of slavery there is not a...
Yeah, even those things, like the insurance industry had to wrestle with its role in paying claims and how they thought about property. It's unbelievably fascinating to think about the role risk mitigation has played in sort of modern history. And London is oftentimes central to that conversation. And you have it where that tightness and that coupling and that's the density of talent and expertise is the other thing that sort of has always made London special. And every time you have like hubs in that kind of way, they always lean onto that because you have more people there who get it, who are sharing ideas, who are working together around things. You could make a comparison to like Silicon Valley in the startup space, like that density of capital, the density of expertise, the density of experience. Like people have tried to replicate it. There's other places you can build startups, right? You can do it in London, you can do it in Israel, like you can do it anywhere. But there's still a reason why the concentration of that talent and expertise and capital makes it unique. And I think London, from a insurance reinsurance perspective, has that unique combination. And then it has all its little nuances, right? It's the history where for a long time you there's really strict dress codes into Lloyd's specifically. There is, for those of you who are from the States, if you come to visit, no brown in town, right? This, at least historically, but you would, like, wearing brown shoes into Lloyd's was vastly frowned upon, or significantly frowned upon. And
may have done it this morning.
Yeah, exactly. Bring your black shoes, my American friends. But so there's all these little nuances, and then part of it as well is you share knowledge by being familiar with what's happening, right? And we talked about sort of the drinking culture and going out at lunch and having pints in Leadenhall and other places. But that's actually quite an important thing because you get a sense as to what's happening in the market, who's doing what is the sort of buzz around deals or capital, like that. It's that sharing of the sort of knowledge, the collective knowledge of the industry that happens is quite unique here.
Yeah, and to the extent that this camaraderie became embodied in the architecture as well. So the various Lloyd's buildings, once the coffee shop was outgrown several times, meant that each time they moved, they what word would you use for the past tense of to strive?
Stroven.
they strave. they strived for. Like they consistently planned to have all of the underwriting and broking community in one room.
Yep.
for that shared experience, right? They wanted everybody to be able to gossip. Again, books written about the power of gossip and the power of setting prices by collective opinion and the effectiveness of that. To the point where, you know, I think we often call Lloyd's a big room with a bell in the middle of it, but that was the point in many ways. How do you get everybody aware of when ships were sinking so that they could make sure nobody priced based on the wrong information? But much more than that, I think as well, that community has included not just the actual characters we think of, so brokers and underwriters, etc., but it's also sat at the heart of a lot of British political and constitutional life, I guess, in some ways. So many people might not be aware of this, but or they might be aware with some of it, but not all of it. But Lloyd's, in particular, as an entity, originally most of its capital was provided by wealthy individuals known as names who had sort of a badge of honor of unlimited liability. So they were completely exposed to as much risk as was associated with the syndicates that they backed, down to their tools of their trade and their bed sheets. You know, everything could be taken away from them to pay for claims. But that didn't stop, you know, very high-ranking politicians, very senior and wealthy, you know, lords and ladies and so on, all becoming names at Lloyd's as a sort of, firstly, a badge of honor, and also because the returns were pretty good and taxes were really high and so on and so forth. There were lots of financial incentives to be a name at Lloyd's. Obviously, there's a whole potted history as how that all fell to pieces with asbestosis and the LMX spiral and so on, which I think we've touched on in a prior Lloyd's episode a long time ago. But the sort of result of both those things before and after was that Lloyd's was hugely prominent as in sort of the elite social life of the time as well. So less so, I think, in more modern generations. People are less familiar with Lloyd's socially, but it's something that maybe later generations you'd grow up knowing about. Oh, everyone knows about Lloyd's. You know, it's that famous place where people go to place risks. And people maybe are names at, and people are directly involved from the community outside of insurance and reinsurance as well, putting their own personal wealth on the line. In addition to that, there's another group of people that got involved a lot in the past, celebrities, which I think has made the London market really famous, right? Because Lloyd's was a place where you could get anything insured.
Yep.
I mean, any favorite examples for you?
There is a lot, and they're weird ones, right? And Lloyd's has always had this reputation of it could insure anything, right? Gene Simmons' tongue, or like Beyonce's butt. There's all manner of body part. If you're famous for a body part, it has been insured at Lloyd's, right? Like it's that kind of, like
David
Beckham's
right foot, David Beckham's left foot.
Yeah, exactly. Hands not insured. But I can hear the shouting of the listeners around the London market is not just Lloyd's, right? And it isn't. And I think it's very easy for us to, as we dive into what makes London special, to lean into the Lloyd's specific part of the community. But as that London market grew, there's the bureaucracy and there's the legacy, and it was harder to get into Lloyd's, and there's a threshold by which you can become a syndicate or a name in the past. But it's still recognized that this was an epicenter for risk. Risk would come here looking for support, and you began to see this emergence of just traditional carriers who would set up branches or entities in London that might be separate from Lloyd's, but could still benefit from the sort of concentration of capital, the concentration of expertise, and certainly benefit from the flow of risk looking for support, right? So you see that part of the market also emerge.
Yeah, I think something that's really taken for granted by those of us who've had the privilege of working within the London market is the fact that so much of Lloyd's and London is designed so that you can walk from business to business. So as reinsurance brokers, typically their offices were set up to be a short walk away from Lloyd's. Willis and Aon in particular, directly opposite on either side of the Lloyd's building on Lime Street. The interesting thing that led to is that all of the other London market companies put their buildings in the same areas because they knew the brokers were there. So trying to make it as convenient for the broker to walk to Lloyd's as it was to walk to a London market insurer that might not be in Lloyd's or might also be in Lloyd's. What we're seeing at the moment, which is really interesting, is Lloyd's is going through a refurb. I don't know if you've heard about this, folks, but very exciting. They're redoing the various underwriting floors of the Lloyd's building for a new modern age, and to try and spread out a bit and mix together some of the syndicates so you get a bit more of a buzz and more easy, access to what you need in the underwriting floor. So that's very exciting to see where that will end up. But what it's meant is all of the various London market entities are reopening their doors and saying, well, we've got a space that underwriters can come and join us. So brokers can come and meet our underwriters at our building. So come on over to our office just next door instead.
What you'll see is even the non-Lloyd's carriers, non-Lloyd's markets, do the same thing, right? These offices that they're designing are intended to host, right? There's massive, like what they call usually broker lounges, but free coffee and treats and snacks, and it's designed to facilitate that face-to-face interaction. And because both the Lloyd's markets and the non-Lloyd's markets, there is that concentration, and the brokers are all within that sort of 5-minute walk. You have it where the whole thing is facilitated to drive that sort of the face-to-face interaction, of course, but also those chats that happen as you're going between places, that you grab someone, you're like, you haven't caught up or you needed to chase them on a thing. It's designed to facilitate that in a lot of ways. And it's just things you don't get when you have people doing work over, email or remotely.
Yeah, and oddly for me, that is probably one of my biggest ties to the industry. If I think very objectively about whether I would consider working in another industry or moving away from insurance or reinsurance, one of the things that holds me most closely to this industry is that sense of community that you get, where whichever firm you work for, if you're in London and you're in the London market sort of area, you can walk down Leadenhall Street, you can walk through the Leadenhall Market, down, any road within 5 minutes of that area, and you will bump into people that you haven't seen for years, just by pure random chance. And that, I guess, is probably validation in some ways, or it's probably this sense of community and belonging. But just feeling like you've got people around you all the time that you don't necessarily have some direct business with, but that you're accidentally staying in touch with constantly, is incredibly motivating, I think. And it leads a lot of people to have a lot of FOMO if they leave. And so you often see people leave the industry and then reappear and come back and say, we've missed it. You often see people retire and then be like, I don't know what to do with myself now that I've retired. They come back in, find a way to still be in the area to catch up with people. It's just such a buzzing and vibrant place to be. And I really struggle, actually, having grown up with that almost, to understand what it must be like in other countries around the world where, there's insurance companies that are a drive away from the broker or a flight away from a partner or similar. It is astonishing to imagine.
Yeah. Well, and I think those nuances are also what's in many ways causing difficulty for the London market as they look to innovate. Like, what does the future of Lloyd's look like, right? Because they're trying to take the industry forward, even currently with this sort of future of work. Like, what does that look like if it's 3 or 4 days a week? And some people really, really want it. Like, the leadership is pushing for it because, as you said, they have built up a relationship and a reputation and a network in the industry that they do that. They pop around, they walk out for lunch, they walk out for a coffee, and they bump into loads of people that they've worked with in the past or they want to catch up with or they've employed in the past. But the younger generations may not have built that same depth of familiarity yet. And so certain audiences are more comfortable being at home and not caring about that. But the leadership teams that's the model that they have always grown up with. And then as the market looks to modernize, it wrestles with how does it retain what made it special and at the same time make it better. Like, so there's always this push of like, we can get paper out and all those things, which sure. But I think it's central to how they think about it. Maybe it's not an existential sort of threat or concern that they see, but they certainly have a harder time articulating it. Um, and if we go back to like that natural evolution that we talked about at the start, at no point did it like jeopardize like the fundamental reason, the raison d'etre, that this why we're here, right? Um, but if we look at sort of the modern push, I think it does present that.
Mm.
And it's like, well, why? We can just trade it electronically. We can just do these things. We can just do it from our bedrooms or our in home offices, and we don't have to spend time waiting in line at Lloyd's or walking for 8 minutes in each direction. Like,
Yeah.
sure,
And it's funny.
but it's different, right?
You've given me like a teary-eyed moment because I think I've just realised that.
You want a tissue?
Well, I think I've just realised that it's almost 10 years and 10 days or something since I first got my Lloyd's pass.
Yeah.
And going back to then as an excited person, first encountering the world of work,
Yeah.
and going into the old wood-panelled library and, going up to floor 11 and floor 12 and seeing the sort of paintings hanging in rooms that had been brought one piece at a time from various old buildings like the Adams Room, and meeting the waiters and getting to know them in their glorious red outfits and so on. Riding in the famous glass elevators, discovering the inside-out building, seeing the slip of the Titanic.
Yeah.
All of these things, the paintings that have the mice hidden in them. There's so many things. I ended up doing loads of Lloyd's tours off the back of this because I was so enthusiastic about it.
Yeah.
But really, we do have a bit of a challenge for the pandemic-stricken generation of new joiners who haven't had the chance to be as starstruck by some of these things.
Yeah.
Policies for the Beatles and things in framed cases, and visits from various members of the royal family coming in.
Well, and I think there's the other things that are kind of existing here in this push of modernization and innovation, which in many ways is needed and it needs to happen. But as we've gone remote and as the world continues to shrink, the value of that concentration begins to erode, right? Using that Silicon Valley analogy again, like, whilst that's still the dominant hub, startups are thriving all over the place, right? And they're looking to deploy capital elsewhere, and it's less of a reliance on, are you here in this pocket? The same thing is happening in the insurance industry where, I can get capital, and I oftentimes want capital from all over the world now. And whilst Lloyd's is helpful for the expertise there, if that person leaves London and goes to Bermuda, which we've seen loads of times, that expertise is now sitting in Bermuda, right? That expertise goes to New York. The liquidity of talent in many ways is creating this complexity where it's like people are kind of wrestling with where does it fit and how does it retain what makes it special. I don't think it's going away, but it's certainly evolving.
Yeah, it's funny what you were just saying actually made me think of a while ago we managed to get hold of the board minutes or the sort of management meeting deck for Blockbuster. I don't you remember this, just immediately after they refused to buy Netflix and instead decided what they were going to do instead. There's now an odd parallel which I hadn't expected to talk about between Lloyd's redesigning its rooms. But they reached this point where they realised actually, okay, we're getting less and less engagement and footfall in our stores. People don't seem to want to come in to buy or to rent DVDs from us anymore. There's lots of other people getting traction online, and the angle they went for was like, well, we need to make it even more of an experience. We're going to add cafes to our Blockbuster stores.
Children's zone.
A children's zone, exactly, where you can let your children play whilst you browse the collection of DVDs, etc. We'll offer more stock and different types. And all these areas there that we're like, really like clinging on to that physical experience, which makes me sad because I do love the Lloyd's experience like very, very deeply. But as our customers change and as our way of operating our daily life starts to change, new generations come in, there is a question mark there. And I think if I'm honest, I think if everybody were honest in the London market about how well technology initiatives have gone over the last 10 years or so, I think there's been a trap of Londonisms. So we have these London Matters reports which highlighted London's becoming less relevant in an increasingly globalized world. London is harder to do business with because of its idiosyncrasies, these Londonisms that mean you have to do things differently for London. And then a lot of investment on one hand to try and reduce the cost, which I think made sense. You know, London is too expensive. That's one reason people are avoiding. And then that got blended in with this Londonisms comment as well, that London's too idiosyncratic in the way that it works versus other areas, with the result that a lot of technology was sort of commissioned to try and make London a different digital experience. But actually, it wasn't done in such a way that actually reduced much cost.
Yep.
I think it's made a chip away, and there have been improvements there. But also, the Londonisms, in many ways, it feels actually got a bit worse. Like, rather than say, okay, we need to find... I think this is improving now, by the way, with the way that some of the newer blueprints have moved. But a lot of the initial narrative was like, well, if you want to trade with London, or if you want to be a member of the London market, you have to pay for, adopt, use exclusively this one platform and this one set of technology.
Yeah.
We're all in this together as one London market to do this very specific digital operating experience. And what was really odd about that was you had a call to arms for the personnel who specifically worked in London for companies that, for the most part, are global.
Yeah.
So it's like, hang on, wait a minute. So who's actually behind this? And it relied almost on personalities like myself who loved London and thought London was a great place to do business and thought London should be promoted and, you know, protected in all its glory, but actually worked for a US company or a Asian company or a company that was very, very global in nature and actually had one arm, one entity that did business in London.
Yeah, and I think what you'll see in that Blockbuster example is a good one where at the end of the day, the buyers are going to drive what happens.
Yeah.
And if the buyers care less and less about the value add that London brings, the market becomes in jeopardy. But we've massively overshot our time slot on this podcast.
We have to carry this
You can see us loving and wrestling with the complexities of this space. So more to come on the London market.
Indeed.
But until next time, everyone.
Yeah, see you soon.